Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Tactics Board. Norwich City are back in action at Ewood Park when they travel to the northwest for the lunchtime kickoff to face Blackburn Rovers in what is quite a big game if they want to keep their championship playoff hopes alive. Of course, they go into it with a bit of momentum after beating Stoke 4-2 last weekend. Blackburn, by contrast, lost 3-0 to Swansea, but they've got a new manager in Valerian Ismail. They might have a bit of a bounce going into it as well, and they're a bit of an unpredictable side for Johannes Hoff-Torp's men. So it should certainly be a very interesting game. You know the drill here on Tactics Board. First of all, I'm going to take you through my predicted 11 for the game. Then we're going to take a look at Blackburn, and as difficult as that might be at the moment, I'm going to look at Valerian Ismail's sort of former teams, how they've set up, how he might change for Blackburn and what that means for Norwich going into this game. And then we're going to do a little bit on Josh Sargent and maybe where he can improve, because I thought Torp said some interesting things on that topic at his pre-match press conference. So we'll get to all of that, but before all of that, we're going to do the predicted starting 11. So without further ado, here's the team I think the Dane will pick for tomorrow's game. So I've gone with Angus Gunn in goal, Kellen Fisher at right back, Shane Duffy and Jose Cordoba in the centre of defence, with Lucian Mahovo at left back, Jakob Sorensen, Anis Ben Silimane and Marcelino Nunez in the middle of midfield, with Lewis Dobbin on the right, Borja Sainz on the left and Josh Sargent through the middle. Up front, you'll notice I've gone for no changes there, and that's certainly the situation that Torp would have liked to be in earlier on in the season with the number of injury problems that they've had. Of course, they won't have Kenny McLean back, which is quite a significant blow, and I think that's something we've spoken about at length in terms of their record without him, how important he is to the team. But I think it's also worth noting that midfield has been going in the right direction. I think Sorensen has almost reopened the debate around his contract with his performances. He's been pretty solid in that role. You've got Marcelino Nunez, who showed how big he is and how talented he is when he came back for that Stoke game. And it's Ben Silimane, who, to be honest, I don't think has been really up to speed or back to his best since he came back from injury, but we've seen the talent that he's got, and he has got a little bit of that creative spark in him as well. And then on the bench, you've got Jacob Wright, who seems to be improving with every game that he has for the club. So the midfield, maybe still missing Kenny McLean, but not in the worst position. Emi Marcondes will be a late call for the game as well. Mankel Forsen coming back before long. Gabriel Forsyth and Liam Gibbs making progress in their returns as well. So an area that feels like it's headed in the right direction. And although it's missing some of those key players, I think it's quite a strong unit at the moment. Lewis Dobbin, another one that could be a late call, but Torp sounded pretty confident, to be honest, that he would be ready to start this one. He was expected to train today, and then obviously if he comes through that successfully, you'd suggest he'll be ready to start for Blackburn. And given how important he's been for Norwich in their last few games, how impressive he's been, the drive that he gives the team, and we'll come on to that a little bit in the Josh Sargent section as well, and how they interact particularly effectively. But given how good he's been, I mean, you can see fans already comparing him to Borja Sainz and maybe thinking about him as a potential replacement in the summer. So you can tell how highly they rate him, and I think we've seen how good he can be. So I've gone with him on the right, and then otherwise, not really much to complain about. The Stoke game felt like it was largely positive, and any negatives that came out of it were more individual errors rather than team structures and big problems that Torp will need to change with his team selection. I know there's been a bit of a debate about Shane Duffy, and I think we have seen why he probably won't be the starting centre-back if and when Norwich do go on to challenge for promotion and be in and around that race. But I think for now and until the end of the season, I can't see him being dislodged, and ultimately it has been quite a good season for him overall. So I think it would be a bit harsh and a bit early for that, especially when they want to give Rory McConville a bit more time sort of on the fringes to develop before he becomes a full-on first-team starting option on a regular basis. So I don't think really there's much that Torup could change even if he wanted to in that 11. But we've spoken a lot this season about consistency. That's certainly something that he wants from that selection. It's not really something he's been able to provide in the most part, but I think that's what he'll do against Blackburn, and that's the team I'm going with. On to Blackburn, and theoretically, as I spoke about earlier, and as Torup spoke about actually, it's quite hard to predict because obviously it's a new coach with a new group of players who we've never seen him work with before. But when I think you look at the histories of those players and that coach, there is a certain style of play that you probably put together that it feels like he may go for, at least in the short term. Most of his career, especially when he's been successful, it's been quite direct. It's been using the wide areas, bypassing the midfield on quite a regular basis, using a high press, using high energy. So it won't necessarily be a completely low block. It might be more of a sort of Preston situation, which might not be the best news for Norwich. But if he does adopt that approach, it feels like he maybe has the sorts of players, certainly from the defensive perspective. They're good physically and aerially, and they can cover the ground. In terms of the pressing, I'm not sure they have quite the energy and the athleticism in their front line to be able to do that. So given he doesn't have long to work with them either, and the fact that Norwich are geared to pass out from the back, that might be something that Ismail tweaks. If he doesn't, then you look at it actually as an area that Norwich could try to exploit, because a press does take time to put together. It's quite a complex tactical thing at championship level. So with only a few days and maybe a squad that isn't quite best geared to it, if Blackburn do try that high pressing style and they aren't quite perfect, then Norwich have a real opportunity there to create space in behind the home team and then exploit it with some of their ball players. And maybe we've seen the weaknesses with the likes of Shane Duffy at times. Angus Gunn is pretty solid, but maybe doesn't take those risks. But if they can get it into Jose Cordoba, who I think displayed his ball playing qualities in that Stoke game, Lucian Mahovo, who also has a lot of technical quality, Kellen Fisher, who you'd put into that bracket. If they can get the ball into those players and then a little bit further forward into the likes of Marcelino Nunez, then they could have real space to exploit and a situation that they can make the most of. But Blackburn do have some of those qualities that an Ismail team have been very successful with in the past, and of course, you know, across the season, although it has been quite an inconsistent and probably quite a poor championship overall. Blackburn are 6th, so, you know, they're nobody to be taken for granted. And with that bump, with that motivation that I'm sure their players will have to impress their new head coach, it will be interesting to see the sort of quality that they turn out, and it certainly won't be easy at all for Norwich. I wanted to finish with a bit of a discussion about Josh Sargent, who's certainly somebody we've spoken a lot about in the last few weeks, but there was almost a new perspective on him, some light that has been shed by Torup in his pre-match press conference, because my colleague Connor Southwell asked him quite an interesting question about the areas of his game that he felt he could still improve. Because you look at him, especially at this level, when you say he's almost a complete striker, he's got that pace, his technical ability has certainly improved no end since he arrived at Carrow Road. His finishing is very good. Tactically, he's got quite a good understanding and he contributes to the press and the defensive side of things as well. Physically, obviously, very, very good and can hold the ball up. So what is he missing? And Torup's answer was a bit more running, a bit more involvement in the game. And I found that quite interesting because he's somebody who we think about as stretching the defence, but Torup wants a bit more of that. I don't think necessarily just in terms of every time any Norwich player has the ball, sprinting in behind and doing that and wasting energy, being that predictable. But he spoke about the fact he'd like him to take up new positions and vary his movement a bit more, maybe drop deep to allow the others to go in behind. And actually, that's a tactic that I would have said maybe a couple of months ago wasn't the best thought out because of the players who Norwich had. And it probably highlights the extent to which players dictate tactics as well as the other way round. Because if prior to the sort of January transfer window you had Sargent dropping deep, then who would really be running beyond him? Maybe Sainz to an extent, but you wouldn't really have the likes of Ante Cianats doing that, Oscar Schwartau, who's played in that right wing position quite a lot this season as well. Cade Gordon, when he was at the club, didn't really do that too much. But I think with Sainz in there and Lewis Dobbin, they have that opportunity because they have two wingers who want to run in behind. Sainz in particular wants to come inside as well and make the most of that space. And you can see when the defenders don't know whether to follow Sargent or to drop off, they don't know which one of those players is going to make that movement in behind every time. That really does put them in a difficult position, and it was certainly something that worked for Norwich against Stoke, rather than maybe that slightly more predictable tactic of just going through to Sargent every single time, which of course is very, very effective, but they can make it even more effective and even more unpredictable. And maybe they can share the chances out a bit more and not be so reliant on Sargent if he does do a bit more of that. So given that feedback, which I'm sure has been given internally long before we received it at that press conference, it'll be interesting actually to note that in this game and maybe to look out for how Sargent's positioning and his movement changes, because it's clearly an area that Torup feels Norwich can be getting more out of. And I think when you break down the tactics of it, you can understand why. But that isn't the only interesting element that there will be in the game. There should be plenty of them. And of course, we'll have them all covered across Pinken channels. So go to pinken.com/subscribe if you haven't already. And you'll have access to all of that opinion, analysis, coverage, updates, reaction, everything that you'll need from the weekend, which hopefully is another positive one. I'll see you again very soon on Tactics Board. Thank you very much for joining me on this one, and have a great one. I'll see you on the other side.